Welcome to a new video. I hope you had an amazing day. Let's take a look at some news stories, shall we? The first one is called, "He Refuses My Offer." We work in airline crew scheduling, where our jobs essentially involve ensuring each flight is fully crewed. This requires us to strictly adhere to many rules, including aviation regulations set by the Federal Aviation Administration and collective bargaining agreements upheld by the pilot and flight attendant unions. However, some of the rules in these agreements can be a little flexible, especially when we can offer pilots additional compensation and they agree to waive certain contractual provisions in exchange. There is a rule for this airline that outlines when and for how long a pilot can be on reserve. Reserve is a window of time in which they are essentially on call in case we need them to work. It states that if we have an assignment for them, it must start within that window or it's not contractually legal. However, we would frequently offer pilots additional compensation, usually a full day's worth of pay, if they agreed to waive that provision and work trips that start outside of their reserve window. Nearly all of the time pilots would accept this additional compensation. Very rarely, in extreme circumstances, we could offer even more pay, sometimes up to 200%, and only if the flight would otherwise be cancelled and cause expensive operational disruptions. I should point out that, while most pilots are fantastic to work with, a certain percentage of them are very arrogant and entitled. It's an attitude that frequently occurs in the pilot population. I don't know why. I've worked in the industry for many years and the same personality tends to appear quite often, more so at the regional airline level, less so in major or legacy airlines. Anyone else who has worked with pilots before can attest to this. The arrogant attitude is especially pronounced towards crew schedulers though, because we get to be the bad guys and make them go to work. This story concerns a pilot with this attitude, who was on reserve. We had a 4-day trip starting in Detroit that we needed to find a captain for, but we did not have any Detroit-based reserve captains that were legal to work it. The trip started around noon the next day, and it was currently late evening the day prior, about 18 hours before the trip started. There was a captain on reserve at that moment and for the next 4 days, but he was scheduled for evenings and the trip started outside his reserve window. So, I called him and customarily offered him a full day's extra pay to immediately go to bed and come back the following morning for this trip. He flat out refuses my offer and then proceeds to tell me I should offer him 200% for the entire trip instead, so basically 4 days of extra pay. I explained that it is against our procedures to offer that much extra pay just to show up early, and even so, we would have to offer that level of compensation to other pilots in seniority order first. He adamantly and rudely proclaims that there is no way he is going to work an illegal assignment unless he gets 200%. I say okay and hang up. At that point, I came up with a brilliant plan. I look up our airline's flight schedule and find out there is a late flight leaving soon to go to Tampa, and a flight the following morning that operates from Tampa back to Detroit. So I rebuild the open trip with all the same flights as before, except now it is a 5-day trip that begins with these 2 flights as flights that the pilot does not operate. So he would fly as a passenger to Tampa, stay in a hotel, then fly as a passenger back to Detroit just in time to work the flights I had previously asked him to work. The new trip was completely legal per the agreements, and it now started comfortably within this captain's reserve window. So, I assign it to him and call him back. He, of course, is not happy about it. He asks me to change it back and agrees that he will now take the extra day of pay, but I decline. The trip is legal now, and I don't need to change it or offer any extra pay for him to work it. I then ice the cake a bit. I humbly and calmly offer to let him deviate off the scheduled flights at the start which he does not pilot. I did the math later, and I found that even if he did not deviate, the cost of a non-revenue seat on both flights and paying for a hotel in Tampa amounted to less than a full day's pay at his pay rate. There was no additional pay for the longer trip either, since he was getting paid for each of the 5 reserve days anyway. This actually saved the company a little money. The last story is called, "Cancel All Services." I had worked at a telecommunications store for quite a few years, and as someone who has worked in all sorts of retail, I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that telecommunication companies have the worst customers. But every now and then, you get back at the worst by giving them exactly what they want. We had a local small business owner that had several services with us: mobile phones, broadband, landlines, the works. He thought that since he had a lot of services, it meant that he could do what he wanted and the rules did not apply to him. This included getting behind on his bills, complaining about late fees and absolutely losing it if any services were restricted. Bear in mind that this only happens after 3 months of overdue bills. If any of these were to happen, he would stomp in, yell and carry on. Now in a lot of stores, we are just that, stores. We can only do very little when it comes to accounts, especially business accounts. So we would process a payment and then call up the accounts department to reinstate the services or unrestrict them. One week, in particular, he came in all smiles and shaking hands. He didn't even mind waiting in line for the people in before him to be served. Normally he would storm up to any consultant, even if they were with customers already being served. I had the luck of being the first one free to serve him. He goes on a long speech about how he is expanding his business and needs several new phones for the new staff he is hiring. I congratulate him and go about the process of getting them activated. We hit a problem early on. Surprise, surprise, he has overdue bills and the system cannot apply new services to an account that is overdue. This does not mean a bill has been issued, it means it is past its due date. He is livid, saying he needs those services. I get on the phone with the accounts team and they are willing to waive the default wait time of 3 business days after an account is settled before applying new services. He wasn't having a bar of it and said he wants the services and will not be paying a cent today. I inform him that it simply cannot be done, literally impossible in our system to do it. He starts yelling, saying that he wants to cancel his services and take them elsewhere. I tell him that it is not something we can do in store and he will need to contact the business accounts department and they can assist him in moving his services elsewhere. He stomps off and I thought this would be the end of it. How wrong I was. The very next day, as soon as the store opens, he is there waiting, red-faced and on the warpath. Being the most senior person during the shift, I dealt with him. He yells about being on the phone for ages, being told they advise not to cancel but to go to another company and port his services. I'm guessing they didn't explain it too well, as porting means to transfer your services to another provider, keeping the same numbers and having minimal if any interruption of service. I explained to him very plainly about what porting meant and that all he needed to do was go to another carrier, sign up his services, give them the numbers he wants brought across, and once they do, we automatically cancel his services on our end once the other provider takes ownership. Simple, right? Wrong. He refused to leave the store until his services were cancelled. Time for my malicious compliance. While it wasn't something we could do in store, we had manual paperwork for lots of things in case of systems going down, compatibility issues, etc. So I go through our internal server to find manual paperwork for account cancellations and print it off, filling everything out on it ready to go. I request 2 forms of ID, which I need to photocopy, that need to be attached to the paperwork and get him to sign. Informing him in no uncertain terms that if he goes ahead with this, his services will be deactivated within 2 business days and will no longer function. He was fine with this, saying once that happened he would go elsewhere. He signed and I went about contacting accounts, faxing the paperwork through, and they processed it all and forwarded me the confirmation for our in-store records. 2 days later, I once again open the store and he is there waiting, red-faced, and the second he sees me, he starts screaming at me that none of his services are working and his company cannot get anything done. No phones, no internet, nothing. And that he is going to sue us for lost income and everything else. I go out the back and pull out the paperwork, going over it with him, going over what I told him the other day. He no longer has any services with us, they are now cancelled, and he will be unable to sign up any new services or potentially reactivate any services until his overdue account is paid. I take him to a computer and try to access his account, showing him it no longer exists on our end and there is literally nothing I can do. He gets up angry but defeated and leaves yelling we have now lost a big customer. I talked to a friend of mine, who worked at a different telco, who ended up dealing with the business owner. Due to his services being cancelled, they were unable to transfer his numbers across since they now didn't exist, and to sign up a broadband service could take up to 10 business days to have activated. His business was essentially shut down for 2 weeks and having to give new numbers to everyone associated with his business because he didn't want to pay his bills and didn't want to listen about porting. It couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.